The date hit him like a physical blow. "That's the day my father's warehouse was burned to the ground," he whispered, his voice turning lethal. "The day the Vancini family declared war and nearly wiped us out 20 years ago. Why is that your code, Eleanor?" The car swerved hard as a black sedan tried to ram their side. Eleanor slammed the shifter, the Interceptor's engine screaming as she forced the pursuit car into a line of parked taxis. Sparks showered the windshield like fireworks. "Because," Eleanor said, her voice trembling for the first time tonight, "that's the day I lost my father too." Dominic froze. "Your father was an accountant for the city. I checked your background myself." "I'm a hacker, Dominic. I wrote the background check you read," she yelled over the screeching tires. "I scrubbed my DNA from the system. I deleted every photo. I spent 5 years becoming a ghost so I could get close to you." A second pursuit car pulled alongside, a window rolling down to reveal a submachine gun. Eleanor slammed the brakes, letting the enemy overshoot them, then rammed their rear quarter panel, sending them spinning into a fountain. "Why?" Dominic demanded, his shadow looming over her in the cramped cabin. "To finish what they started? To kill me from the inside?" "No," Eleanor screamed, tears finally blurring her vision as she took a sharp turn into a narrow alleyway, the mirrors of the car scraping against the brick walls. "I am the daughter of Silvio Vancini. My father was the one who ordered the hit on your family. He was a monster, Dominic. He used people like chess pieces, and when he died that night in the fire I was glad." The revelation hung in the air, more explosive than any grenade. The silence that followed was heavy with 20 years of blood and betrayal. The man she loved was the sworn enemy of her bloodline. "I didn't come to you to destroy you," she whispered, her voice cracking as she pushed the car toward the industrial docks. "I came to you because I knew the Vancinis weren't gone. I knew they were regrouping under Julian, and I knew you were the only one who could stop them. I've spent every day for 3 years protecting you, scrubbing your digital trail, feeding Julian false intel. I've been your guardian because it's the only way I could atone for the name I carry." Dominic's jaw was a line of granite. He looked out the window at the passing blur of the city. He thought of the girl who brought him coffee every morning, who never missed a deadline, who looked at him with such soft, hidden longing. And then he thought of the Vancini name, the name that had haunted his nightmares and filled the graveyards of his friends. "You're a Vancini," he said, the words tasting like ash. "In blood only," she pleaded. "Look at me, Dominic. I am the woman who just took a bullet for you. I am the woman who has managed your accounts, hidden your secrets, and loved you from the shadows while you looked right through me. Does the blood in my veins matter more than the life I've lived at your side?" Dominic didn't answer. He couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, but the sacrifice was too real. Suddenly, the PDA in Dominic's hand began to beep frantically. "Eleanor, what is this?" She glanced at the screen, her face going pale. "It's a tracker. Not for the car. For the tablet." "The one you gave to Santanico?" "No," she whispered, her eyes widening with horror. "The tablet was a decoy. But the EMP burst. It didn't just kill the electronics. It triggered a dormant beacon in the Gala's security system. Dominic, Julian didn't just want you dead tonight. He wanted to lure you out. He wanted us to take this car." "Why?" Eleanor looked at the GPS. They were heading toward the Toretto main shipyard. "Because he's not following us anymore. He's already there. And he has your sister." The car fishtailed as Eleanor's heart plummeted. The midpoint revelation had shifted everything. This wasn't an escape. It was a guided tour into a slaughterhouse. The crystal chandelier overhead didn't just illuminate the ballroom. It felt like 1,000 jagged diamonds waiting to fall. Eleanor Rigby felt the cold sweat pooling at the small of her back, the silk of her emerald gown, a dress she had hidden in the back of her closet for 3 years, clinging to her skin like a second, more honest layer of identity. Beside her, the air seemed to displace under the sheer gravity of the man whose arm she held. Dominic Toretto, the man the city called the Iron King of the underworld, didn't walk into a room, he laid claim to it. The whispers hit them before they even reached the center of the marble floor. They weren't just whispers, they were serrated blades. "Is that her? The one who organizes his files? He must be losing his mind. Look at those glasses. You can put silk on a sparrow, but it's still a dull little bird. I heard he brought her as a joke. Bet perhaps? To see if the elite would actually be polite to a servant." Eleanor's hand trembled on Dominic's bicep. She was the unattractive shadow, the girl with the oversized blazers and the clinical efficiency who kept his ledgers clean and his enemies at bay from behind a computer screen. Tonight, the transformation was subtle. The glasses were gone, her hair was a dark waterfall, and the emerald silk highlighted a grace she'd spent years suppressing. But to the vultures in this room, she was still the mouse in the lion's den. Dominic didn't look at them. He leaned down, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that only she could hear. "Don't lower your head, Eleanor. They aren't looking at a secretary. They're looking at the only person in this room who could ruin them all before dessert is served." But as the waiter approached with a tray of vintage Bollinger, Eleanor didn't see the wine. She saw the slight, unnatural tremor in the server's left hand. She saw the way the light refracted differently off the rim of the glass intended for Dominic. A faint, oily residue that shouldn't have been there. In that heartbeat, the gala stopped being a social execution and turned into a literal one. The ugly secretary realized the trap wasn't the mockery of the elite. It was the poison in the crystal. Hello to every single one of you joining us today. I am so incredibly grateful to have you here in our storytelling corner. Whether you're watching from the bustling streets of New York, the quiet hills of Scotland, or anywhere in between, welcome. How are you all doing today? I truly hope you're ready for a story that proves the most dangerous person in the room is often the one everyone ignores. Before we dive deeper into the shadows of the Toretto Empire, please take a quick second to check if you've subscribed to the channel. It really helps us bring these massive, emotional journeys to life, and we have so many more twists planned for you. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single beat. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. I love reading where our community gathers. Eleanor's mind raced through the dossiers she had memorized. The waiter wasn't on the staff list she'd vetted 3 days ago. The Iron King was about to take a sip of a chemical cocktail that would stop his heart in 30 seconds, and the ballroom was filled with silent conspirators waiting for him to fall. She had 2 choices: stay the quiet, mocked secretary and watch her world burn, or shatter the glass and reveal exactly who she was to the people who despised her. As Dominic reached for the flute, his fingers inches from the stem, Eleanor felt the cold steel of a realization hit her. This night wasn't about a charity gala. It was a setup. And the only thing standing between the city's most feared man and a casket was the woman the world thought was a joke. Will she move in time? And if she saves him, will the secret she's been hiding about her own past finally be dragged into the light? The silence in the aftermath of a tragedy that hasn't happened yet is the loudest sound in the world. As Eleanor stood there, her fingers inches from Dominic's sleeve, the world slowed into the sharp, clinical fragments she used to manage his empire. To the elite of the city, she was Eleanor Rigby, the girl who faded into the beige wallpaper of the Toretto corporate offices. But behind those eyes now sharpened by the adrenaline of a prey animal turned protector, lay a mind that functioned like a high-speed processor. Eleanor didn't just want to survive, she wanted to be seen by the only man who mattered. For 3 years, her deepest desire had been buried under ledgers and encrypted files. She loved Dominic Toretto with a ferocity that terrified her, not for his power, but for the fractured, lonely man she saw when the penthouse lights went down and the Iron King persona dropped. Her fear, however, was a yawning abyss. She was certain that if he ever truly saw her, not as a tool but as a woman, he would find her lacking compared to the high society sirens who constantly clawed for his attention. Dominic, for his part, was a fortress of a man. His last name, Toretto, was a brand of fear, but his first name, taken from a legacy of strength, belonged to Eleanor in ways he hadn't yet admitted to himself. He stood 6'3" of tailored charcoal wool and scars hidden by custom shirts. He was a man who trusted no one, yet he had handed the keys to his kingdom to a woman the world called plain. He didn't value her for her beauty. He valued her because she was the only person in his life who didn't want something from him. Or so he thought. I have to catch my breath. The chemistry between these two is absolutely electric. Who knew a kitchen escape could be so intense? If you're screaming at your screen for them to just kiss already, smash that like button. And for my amazing community, which side are you on? Do you think Dominic should be angry that Eleanor kept these secrets? Or is he just impressed by her badassery? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you can see how they get out of that garage. It's about to get fast and very, very furious. The elevator chimed, the doors sliding open to the cold, concrete expanse of the subgarage. But the peace was an illusion. Standing in front of a row of black SUVs was Santanico Pandemonium. She wasn't wearing her gala heels anymore. She was in combat boots, holding a submachine gun with the practiced ease of a professional. Going somewhere, Eleanor? Santanico sneered, her eyes gleaming with a manic jealousy. Julian wants the king, but I just want to see what's inside that pretty little head of yours. You think you're so smart hiding in plain sight. But you forgot one thing. In this city, even the shadows belong to the Pandemoniums. Dominic stepped out, his hand sliding toward the small of his back where he kept a backup piece, but Santanico raised the barrel. Dominic. One move and I paint the walls with your little pet. Now, Eleanor, be a good girl and hand over the tablet. I know you have the override codes for the Toretto vaults on there. Eleanor stepped forward, moving past Dominic. She looked small, fragile, and utterly defeated. You're right, Santanico. I'm just a secretary. I shouldn't have tried to play your game. She held out the tablet. Santanico smirked, reaching for it with one hand. In that split second, Eleanor didn't drop the tablet. She triggered the overload command she'd been prepping. The tablet's lithium battery didn't just die. It sparked a localized EMP burst combined with a high-decibel screech that echoed through the concrete garage like a banshee's wail. Santanico screamed, dropping her weapon to cover her ears. Now! Eleanor yelled. Dominic lunged, taking down the two guards flanking Santanico before they could blink. Eleanor didn't wait for the dust to settle. She ran toward a nondescript, dust-covered tarp in the corner. She yanked it back, revealing a matte black reinforced muscle car that looked like it had been birthed in a nightmare. Get in, she commanded, leaping into the driver's seat. Dominic slid into the passenger side, staring at the customized dashboard filled with screens and toggle switches. Eleanor, is this a nitro tank? She floored the accelerator, the engine roaring like a caged beast suddenly set free. It's a twin-turbocharged, 1,000 horsepower gift to myself for my 3-year anniversary at the firm. Hold on, Dominic. The Vancinis brought a small army, but they didn't bring a driver like me. As the tires screamed against the concrete, the car fishtailed and then shot forward, heading straight for the barricade of SUVs blocking the exit. The tension hadn't just risen, it had reached its boiling point. The matte black Interceptor didn't just drive. It tore through the garage like a predator reclaiming its territory. The roar of the engine was a physical force, vibrating through the floorboards and deep into Dominic Toretto's chest. Behind them, the sounds of Santanico's screaming orders were swallowed by the screech of burning rubber as Eleanor drifted the heavy machine with the surgical precision of a professional racer. Brace yourself, Eleanor commanded. Her voice had lost every trace of the stuttering, shy secretary. It was cold, melodic, and terrifyingly certain. She didn't aim for the gap between the blocking SUVs. She aimed for the structural pillar right beside them. At the last microsecond, she flicked the wheel and engaged the hydraulic handbrake. The car performed a perfect 180-degree spin, the reinforced rear bumper slamming into the SUVs like a wrecking ball, clearing a path toward the ramp. Before the guards could even raise their weapons, the Interceptor was screaming up the concrete incline and bursting into the midnight air of the city. The cool night breeze hit the windshield, but the heat inside the car was suffocating. You're going to have to explain that maneuver, Eleanor, Dominic said, his hand gripping the door handle as she wove through the late-night traffic of the financial district at 120 miles per hour. That's a specialized tactical drift. They only teach that at the academy or in the high-stakes circuits in Europe. Eleanor didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the rearview mirror. 3 sets of headlights had just swerved out from the Gala's shadows. Julian Ciro's pursuit team. Dominic, check the glove box. There's a specialized PDA. Enter the code 1-0-1-4. Dominic reached over, his large hand brushing her thigh. He felt the tension in her muscles, the raw power she was channeling into the car. He found the device and punched in the numbers. 1014, October 14th. The kitchen was a labyrinth of stainless steel and shadows, smelling of expensive truffles and cold, metallic fear. The strobe-like flashes of gunfire from the ballroom pulsed against the swinging doors, but inside the air was heavy with a different kind of pressure. Dominic Toretto stood like a titan between Eleanor and Julian's barrel, his hand reaching back to grip hers. His touch wasn't just protective, it was a silent tether, A promise that for the first time in his life he wasn't fighting alone. You think she's yours, Dominic? Julian Ciro laughed, the sound echoing off the industrial refrigerators. He adjusted his grip on the suppressed pistol, the red laser dot dancing across Dominic's chest before flicking to Eleanor's forehead. You don't even know her name. Not her real name. You think you found a diamond in the rough, but you actually invited a viper into your bed. Shut up, Julian, Eleanor snapped. She didn't cower. Instead, she tapped a final command into her tablet. Suddenly, the industrial sprinklers in the kitchen hissed to life, not with water, but with a thick fire-suppressant foam that turned the room into a blinding white haze. Move. Eleanor hissed, yanking Dominic to the left just as a suppressed shot whispered past his ear, thudding into a side of Wagyu beef hanging behind them. They dove behind a massive prep station. The world was now a muffled, white-out nightmare. Eleanor's heart was drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her hands remained terrifyingly steady. She reached into her garter, pulling out a small, high-frequency jammer. This will kill their comms for 5 minutes, she whispered, her face inches from Dominic's. In the dim emergency lighting, her skin looked like porcelain, and the fire in her eyes was something Dominic had never seen. A raw, tactical brilliance that made his pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with Julian. We need to get to the basement garage. My car is there. It's armored. Dominic looked at her, really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time through the fog. Your car? Eleanor, you take the bus to work every morning. I've seen the monthly pass on your desk. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. A dangerous, beautiful thing. I also own a custom-tuned interceptor parked in the sublevel. I like the bus, Dominic. It's great for data mining the city's transit grid without being tracked. Now, are we going to talk about my hobbies or are we going to stay alive? Dominic let out a short, dark laugh. Remind me to give you a raise if we survive this. If we survive this, I'm taking your chair, she countered. They moved through the foam-filled kitchen like ghosts. Dominic led the way, his instincts honed by a decade of street wars and power grabs. Every corner they turned was a gamble. At the service elevator, 2 of Julian's men emerged, their tactical gear a stark contrast to the opulence of the Gala. Dominic didn't hesitate. He was a whirlwind of precision and brutality. He disarmed the first man with a sickening crack of bone, using the soldier's own body as a shield against the second. But as the second gunman aimed, Eleanor didn't wait to be rescued. She swung a heavy copper pot with a force that sent the man crashing into a rack of crystal glassware. Dominic paused, staring at the unconscious mercenary, then back at Eleanor, who was casually wiping a smudge of foam from her emerald sleeve. Where did you learn to swing like that? Self-defense classes, she lied smoothly. And 3 brothers who didn't like sharing the remote. They slipped into the elevator, the doors closing just as Julian's voice screamed orders from the hallway. As the lift descended, the silence between them became thick, not with fear but with a growing, undeniable magnetism. The adrenaline was a catalyst, stripping away the roles of boss and secretary, leaving only 2 people who had spent years leaning on each other without ever touching. Dominic turned to her, pinning her against the mirrored wall of the elevator. His hands rested on either side of her head. No more lies, Eleanor. You knew the Vancinis were coming. You knew about Julian. You've been playing a game I didn't even know was on the board. Why? Eleanor looked up at him, her breath hitching. The ugly glasses were gone, and in the harsh light of the elevator, her beauty was a weapon, sharp, refined, and tragic. Because everyone wants to be the king, Dominic. But no one wants to do the work to keep the king on his throne. I didn't do this for the empire. I didn't do it for the money. Then why? He growled, his face inches from hers. Because I knew if I told you the truth, you'd push me away to protect me, she whispered, her hand rising to rest on his chest, feeling the frantic gallop of his heart. And I would rather be your secretary in the shadows than a memory you keep in a gilded cage. Dominic's gaze softened, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. For a second the danger outside vanished. The Iron King was crumbling, replaced by a man who realized he had been searching the world for power when the only true power he ever needed was standing right in front of him, covered in kitchen foam and wearing a borrowed dress. Beside them, the glamorous foil to Eleanor's quiet strength arrived in the form of Santanico Pandemonium, a woman whose last name was as chaotic as her reputation. Santanico was a diamond-clad socialite and the daughter of a rival family head. She glided toward them, her eyes raking over Eleanor with a visceral disgust. "Dominic, darling," Santanico purred, her voice like honey poured over glass. "I thought the invitation said +1, not plus staff. Did your valet get lost, or are you actually intending to dance with the help?" The circle of elites chuckled, a dry, papery sound. Eleanor felt the familiar sting of invisibility. She looked at her hands, pale, trembling slightly but capable of rerouting millions of dollars with a single keystroke. She thought of the secret she kept in a locked drawer in her apartment. A set of burner phones and a list of names that would hang every person in this room. She wasn't just a secretary, she was the architect of Dominic's safety. She was his silent guardian, his ugly duckling, who had built a cage around his enemies without them ever knowing her name. "Santanico," Dominic replied, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through Eleanor's arm. "Eleanor has more intelligence in her help finger than you have in your entire bloodline. I suggest you find someone else to bore with your insecurities." The insult was a physical blow to the socialite, but for Eleanor, it was a spark in the dark. Yet the warmth was fleeting. As she glanced back at the waiter, the one with the trembling hand, she noticed a man standing near the balcony. It was Julian Ciro, a disgraced former lieutenant of the Toretto family who had vanished 6 months ago. His presence here was a death sentence. Eleanor's motivation shifted from self-preservation to a cold, calculating rage. These people mocked her, but they were the ones who were truly blind. They saw a girl in a sad emerald dress. She saw a battlefield. She realized then that her secret wasn't just her love for Dominic. It was the fact that she had been tracking Julian Ciro for months without telling Dominic, hoping to present his head on a metaphorical platter to prove her worth. The tension in the room was a living thing, a coil winding tighter and tighter. Every laugh from a guest felt like a countdown. Every clink of a glass was a heartbeat closer to the end. Eleanor realized that the man she loved was standing on a trapdoor, and the entire city was waiting to pull the lever. I have to stop for a second and ask, have you ever felt like the underdog in a room full of giants? It's a heavy feeling, isn't it? If you're rooting for Eleanor to show these people exactly who she is, drop a Team Eleanor in the comments right now. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to join our community. Your support is the fuel that keeps these stories burning bright. We're just getting started and the stakes are about to skyrocket. Eleanor looked at Dominic. She saw the way his jaw was set, the way he scanned the room with a predator's instinct, yet even he was missing the subtle poison. He was looking for a gun. He wasn't looking for a chemical. He was the king, but every king needed a queen who could play the game better than he could. She felt a strange, dark thrill. Tonight, the unattractive secretary would die, and the woman who truly ran the Toretto empire would have to emerge. But the cost of that revelation was higher than she ever imagined. To save him, she would have to expose her most dangerous secret. She wasn't just Eleanor Rigby, the orphan from the suburbs. She was the daughter of the man who had nearly destroyed Dominic's father 20 years ago. The air in the ballroom grew thick, the scent of expensive lilies suddenly smelling like a funeral. Eleanor leaned in closer to Dominic, her lips brushing his ear, sending a jolt of electricity through both of them that had nothing to do with the danger and everything to do with the years of unspoken longing between them. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice a steel blade. "Don't touch that drink. And whatever happens in the next 10 seconds, do not let go of my hand." The Iron King froze. For the first time in his life, he saw a flash of something in Eleanor's eyes that wasn't subservience. It was command. The world didn't end with a scream. It began with the soft, melodic chime of a silver spoon hitting a crystal flute. The waiter, a man whose name tag read Peter, but whose eyes screamed executioner, glided forward. The tray he carried was a silver mirror reflecting the distorted, mocking faces of the elite. As he reached their circle, the air seemed to crystallize. The poison Eleanor had spotted, a rare synthetic neurotoxin she'd identified from a deep web black market ledger months ago, was sitting in the amber liquid of the lead glass, shimmering under the chandelier's glare. "A toast to the Iron King," Santanico Pandemonium declared, her voice cutting through the ambient hum of the ballroom like a serrated edge. She raised her own glass, her eyes fixed on Dominic with a predatory hunger that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "To the man who has everything, and the vision to bring a bit of character to our hallowed halls." The guests chuckled, a collective rhythmic sound that felt like stones being thrown at a glass house. Dominic's hand, scarred and powerful, reached out. His fingers hovered over the stem of the poisoned glass. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She knew the protocol. She was the shadow. She was supposed to be invisible. But if she stayed a shadow, Dominic would be a corpse. "Dominic, wait," she said. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a command that sliced through the laughter. The ballroom went dead silent. The socialites froze, champagne glasses halfway to their lips. Santanico's smirk faltered, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. No one, interrupted Dominic Toretto. "Eleanor." Dominic's voice was a low warning, a rumble of thunder before the storm. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the glass, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and burgeoning irritation. The waiter's hand jerked. Just a fraction. But to Eleanor it was a confession. "The vintage is wrong," Eleanor lied, her voice gaining a cold, tectonic stability. She stepped forward, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that shouldn't have belonged to a secretary. She reached out, her hand steady as she intercepted the glass before Dominic could touch it. "Mr. Toretto only drinks the 96 Reserve for celebrations of this magnitude. This is a common blend." A ripple of mocking laughter broke the silence. Julian Ciro, watching from the balcony, leaned over the railing, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "The mouse has a palate? How charming. Perhaps she should go back to the kitchen and check the labels herself." "It's not just the vintage, Julian," Eleanor said, her eyes snapping up to meet his. For the first time she wasn't looking through her glasses. She was looking through him. The room gasped. She had used his name, a name that shouldn't have been on the guest list. She turned her gaze back to the waiter. He was sweating now, the beads of moisture rolling down his temple. "And you," she whispered, "you aren't Peter. Peter has a daughter and a mortgage. You have a tattoo of a weeping willow on your inner wrist, the mark of the Vancini syndicate." The waiter's eyes went wide. The tray tilted. In one explosive motion, Eleanor didn't just take the glass, she hurled it. Not at the floor but directly at the chest of the man who had tried to deliver death. The glass shattered against his white jacket, the amber liquid soaking into the fabric. Within seconds the man began to gasp, his hands clawing at his throat as the contact-based toxin began its work. Chaos erupted. Screams tore through the sophisticated air as the waiter collapsed, his body convulsing in a terrifying display of the poison's efficiency. The guests scrambled back, tripping over silk hems and spilling expensive bourbon. "Security!" Santanico shrieked, but her voice was drowned out by the heavy thud of the ballroom's oak doors being slammed shut from the outside. Dominic moved faster than the eye could follow. He didn't go for a weapon, he went for Eleanor. He shoved her behind the massive girth of a marble pillar just as the first gunshot shattered a vase of lilies inches from where she had been standing. "You saw it," Dominic breathed, his face inches from hers. The Iron King was gone. In his place was a soldier. His eyes searched hers, finding not the timid girl who filed his taxes, but a woman who had just diagnosed a sophisticated assassination attempt in the blink of an eye. "How did you see it?" "I see everything, Dominic," she snapped, her breath hitching as she reached into the thigh-high slit of her emerald dress. She didn't pull out a lipstick. She pulled out a small, sleek tablet, the master key to the building's security system that she had hacked while they were in the limo. "I've been watching the Vancini family's encrypted comms for 3 weeks. They didn't just come for you. They came to take the city back." Another bullet chipped the marble above them. "Eleanor, look at me," Dominic commanded, his hands gripping her shoulders. The heat from his palms seared through the silk of her dress. "Who are you? Truly?" The revelation she had feared for years sat on the tip of her tongue. She could tell him she was the daughter of his father's greatest enemy. She could tell him she had been protecting him from shadows he didn't even know existed. But the sound of heavy boots hitting the marble floor outside the ballroom told her that time had run out. "I'm the person who's going to get you out of here alive," she said, her voice dropping into a hauntingly calm tone. "But you're going to have to trust me more than you've ever trusted anyone." Suddenly the lights went out. In the pitch black of the ballroom, the only sound was the frantic breathing of the terrified elite and the metallic clack-clack of weapons being readied. "Dominic," Eleanor's voice came out of the dark, steady and cold. "The third-floor service exit is rigged with explosives. We have to go through the kitchens. And Dominic? Yeah. Don't use your gun yet. They're tracking the muzzle flashes. Follow the sound of my voice. As she led him through the darkness, the ugly secretary was gone. In her place was a ghost, a legend in the making. But as they reached the kitchen doors, a flashlight beam cut through the dark, illuminating a figure standing in their path. It was Julian Ciro, and he wasn't alone. He held a detonator in one hand and a suppressed pistol in the other. You've been a very busy girl, Eleanor, Julian sneered. But did you really think you could play in our world without getting burned? Or did you think your king would actually love a monster like you once he saw what you really are? Dominic stepped forward, shielding Eleanor with his body, his voice a low, lethal snarl. She's not a monster, Julian. He's mine. And you're a dead man. The inciting incident had passed, but the real war had just begun. I am absolutely shaking. Vancini, our Eleanor is the daughter of the man who started it all? This changes everything. Do you think Dominic can ever forgive her for keeping this from him? Or is their love dead before it even truly began? I need your theories. If you think Dominic will choose his family legacy over Eleanor, type legacy in the comments. If you think love conquers all, type always Eleanor. And please, if you're enjoying this high-octane drama, subscribe and hit that bell. We are heading into the darkest hour, and I don't want you to miss the fallout. The interceptor roared onto the pier, the ocean spray hitting the hood. In the distance, the silhouettes of cranes stood like giant executioners. Standing under a spotlight near the edge of the water was Julian, holding a phone to his ear, a cruel smirk visible even from 100 yards away. Eleanor slammed the car into park, her hands trembling on the wheel. She turned to Dominic, her eyes searching his for any sign of the man who had looked at her with tenderness in the elevator. Dominic, I swear to you I didn't know about your sister. I would never. Get out of the car, Eleanor, Dominic said. His voice was cold, colder than the ocean. He didn't look at her. He didn't touch her. He just stepped out into the night, leaving the woman who had saved his life alone in the dark with her secrets. The midpoint had passed. The truth was out. And as the Vancini soldiers emerged from the shipping containers, Eleanor realized that being the Iron King's secretary was easy. Surviving as his enemy's daughter was going to be impossible. The wind howling off the Atlantic felt like 1,000 needles of ice against Eleanor's skin as she stepped out of the interceptor. The heavy scent of salt and rusted iron filled the air, the industrial shipyard a graveyard of skeletal cranes and looming shipping containers. Ahead, under the flickering hum of a yellow floodlight, Julian Ciro stood with a relaxed, arrogant posture that made Eleanor's stomach churn. Beside him, tied to a rusted mooring bollard, was Mia Toretto, Dominic's younger sister, her eyes wide with a terror that Eleanor felt reflected in her own soul. Dominic walked toward them, his silhouette a towering wall of silent, vibrating fury. He didn't look back at Eleanor. He didn't acknowledge the woman who had just revealed her bloodline was responsible for every scar on his heart. To him, in this moment, she was a ghost, a Vancini ghost haunting his reality. Welcome home, Dominic, Julian called out, his voice amplified by the hollow metal of the containers. And welcome home to the little Vancini princess. I must say, Eleanor, you played the part of the dowdy mouse better than your father played the part of a martyr. If he could see you now weeping over a Toretto, he'd kill you himself. Let her go, Julian. Dominic's voice was a low, tectonic growl. This is between us. You want the throne? You want the city? Take it. Just let my sister walk. Julian chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Oh, Dominic, you still think this is about business? This is about the natural order. A Toretto on top was an anomaly. A Vancini in the shadows was a mistake. Tonight I rectify both. With a sudden, violent movement, Julian's men emerged from the darkness. There were dozens of them, the remnants of the Vancini syndicate that Eleanor had tried so hard to dismantle from her desk. They surrounded Dominic, their weapons leveled at his chest. But first, Julian sneered, turning his gaze to Eleanor. The princess needs to choose. Eleanor, you have the master encryption key to the Toretto offshore accounts on that device in your pocket. Hand it over, and I'll let Dominic live long enough to watch me marry his sister into our family. Refuse. And I start with her fingers. Eleanor felt the weight of the PDA in her pocket. It was the black box of the Toretto empire. If she gave it to Julian, Dominic would be bankrupt, his power stripped, his legacy erased. He kept it, Mia would suffer. He looked at Dominic. He finally turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was no love there now, only a cold, agonizing distance. "Don't do it, Eleanor," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I'd rather see it all burn than see Avancini win again." The words cut deeper than any blade. Avancini. He had reduced her entire existence, 3 years of devotion and protection, to a surname she hated. "I'm not doing this for Avancini, Dominic," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm doing this for you." She pulled the device from her pocket. Julian's eyes lit up with a feverish greed. But as she stepped forward to hand it over, the darkness of the shipyard was suddenly split by a blinding white light. Santanico Pandemonium hadn't stayed at the gala. She had followed the tracker in Julian's car, but she hadn't come to help him. She had come to take what she believed was hers. From the top of a stacked container she opened fire, not on Dominic but on Julian's men. "If anyone is killing the king, it's me," Santanico screamed over the roar of her submachine gun. Chaos erupted. The shipyard became a meat grinder of crossfire. Dominic lunged for the nearest guard, his hands finding purchase on a throat as he used the man as a shield. Julian scrambled back, dragging Mia toward the edge of the pier. "Eleanor, run!" Dominic shouted, a flash of his old protectiveness breaking through the ice. But Eleanor didn't run. She saw Julian's hand go for his waistband, a second detonator. He wasn't just planning to kill them, he had rigged the pier. She sprinted toward Julian, her emerald dress fluttering like a broken wing. She wasn't a fighter, not like Dominic, but she was fast. She tackled Julian just as his thumb pressed the button. The explosion didn't happen under the pier. It happened in the container yard behind them, a wall of fire erupting and cutting off the exit. They were trapped. Julian snarled, throwing Eleanor off him with a backhand that sent her spinning across the wet concrete. Her glasses, the ones she wasn't even wearing but had kept in her pocket out of habit, shattered under his boot. He grabbed her by the hair, forcing her to look at Dominic, who was currently pinned down by 3 men near the edge of the water. "You see him, Eleanor?" Julian hissed in her ear. "He hates you. Even if you save him, he will never touch you again. He will never trust Avancini. You are alone. You have always been alone." Eleanor looked at Dominic. He was struggling, his face bruised, his eyes fixed on her with a mixture of horror and realization. She saw the despair in his gaze. The Iron King was watching the only woman he had ever truly let in be brutalized by the ghost of his past. "I know," Eleanor whispered, her voice a ghost of a sound. In that moment she felt the ultimate weight of her darkest hour. She had lost her father's legacy, she had lost her identity, and now she had lost the man who was her entire world. The hopeless reality of her situation settled over her like a shroud. She was the daughter of an enemy, the secretary of a king, and a woman with no home left to go to. Julian raised his gun, pressing the cold barrel against her temple. "Say goodbye to your king, princess." "I can't breathe. I actually can't breathe." Eleanor is at the mercy of a madman, Dominic is pinned, and the shipyard is on fire. Is this really how it ends for them? After everything she sacrificed? I need you guys now more than ever. If your heart is breaking for Eleanor, please comment "Stay strong" below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I need to know you're with me as we head into the final confrontation. We are at the absolute breaking point. Can love survive a betrayal this deep? Or is the Toretto-Vancini blood feud destined to end in a double funeral? Dominic let out a roar of pure, unadulterated agony, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the pier. He threw off the men holding him, his strength fueled by a desperation that transcended physical limits. But he was too far. He was 20 yards away, and Julian's finger was tightening on the trigger. Eleanor closed her eyes. She didn't pray for her life. She prayed that Dominic would remember the way she looked at him in the elevator, just for a second, before he remembered her father's name. The hammer of the gun clicked. But the shot that echoed through the shipyard didn't come from Julian's weapon. The gunshot that cracked through the salty night air didn't come from Julian's pistol, nor did it find its mark in Eleanor's temple. Instead, Julian's arm jerked violently as a bullet shattered the concrete inches from his foot, followed by a second that winged his shoulder. From the shadows of the towering shipping containers, a fleet of blacked-out sedans roared onto the pier, their headlights cutting through the smoke of the burning yard. But these weren't Vancini reinforcements. These were the elite tactical unit of the Toretto Private Security Force. Men Dominic had trained himself, led by a man Eleanor recognized instantly. Brian O'Connor, Dominic's most trusted lieutenant and the only person who knew about Eleanor's secret operations. "Drop it, Julian," Brian shouted, his voice amplified by a megaphone as he stepped from his car, rifle leveled. "The entire shipyard is surrounded. There is no way out for the Vancini syndicate." The distraction was all Dominic needed. With a guttural roar, he lunged across the remaining distance, his body a living projectile. He tackled Julian with such force that both men crashed into a stack of rusted steel pipes. The guns skittered across the pavement, sliding toward the edge of the pier. Eleanor gasped, her lungs burning from the smoke as she scrambled toward Mia. With trembling fingers she pulled a small ceramic blade from her hidden sleeve, a tool she'd kept for years, and sliced through Mia's zip ties. "Go to Brian. Go now," Eleanor urged, shoving the younger girl toward the approaching security team. "What about you?" Mia cried, looking at the two men locked in a brutal struggle on the ground. "I have to finish this," Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a register of absolute terrifying clarity. "I'm the only one who can." She didn't run toward the safety of the black sedans. She ran toward the edge of the pier where the gun had fallen. As she reached for it, a hand clamped around her ankle. Julian, blood streaming from his nose, had managed to kick Dominic back and was now crawling toward the weapon. You traitorous little rat," Julian wheezed, his eyes bulging with a manic, flickering light. Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't cry. She looked down at him with the cold, calculating gaze of a woman who had spent 3 years learning how to dismantle men like him. She kicked him square in the jaw with the heel of her emerald pump, a move that sent him reeling back toward the edge. She grabbed the pistol. The weight of it was cold, familiar, and heavy with the sins of her father. Dominic stood up, his shirt torn, his knuckles split and bleeding. He looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, as she held the weapon pointed directly at Julian's heart. The Iron King was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his eyes searching hers for the secretary he thought he knew. "Eleanor," Dominic whispered, his voice no longer cold, but layered with a sudden aching realization. "Put the gun down. You don't have to be like them. You aren't a Vancini. Not tonight." "He's right, Eleanor." Julian laughed, a wet, gurgling sound as he sat on the edge of the pier, the dark Atlantic churning behind him. "You don't have the stomach for it. You're just a girl who likes numbers. You're a fake. A ghost." Eleanor looked at Julian, then at the gun, then finally at Dominic. A strange, serene peace washed over her. She realized the turning point wasn't about who won the fight or who held the throne. It was about who held the power over her own identity. "You're right, Julian," she said, her voice steady and echoing through the shipyard. "I'm not my father. I'm not a murderer. And I'm not just a secretary." She turned the gun toward the dark water and pulled the trigger until the magazine was empty, the flashes illuminating her face with a rhythmic, ethereal light. The bullets hit the waves, harmless and forgotten. "I'm the woman who just deleted the Vancini inheritance," she said, pulling the PDA from her pocket and holding it up. "Every cent, every offshore account, every property deed. I've just rerouted the entire Vancini estate into a trust for the victims of your family's wars. You have nothing, Julian. No army, no money, and no name." Julian's face went from rage to a hollow, pale mask of shock. He looked at the device, then at the surrounding soldiers, and finally at the water. He was a king of nothing. Without another word, he scrambled backward, choosing the cold embrace of the Atlantic over the justice waiting for him on the pier. He disappeared into the black waves with a silent splash. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackling of the distant fires and the rhythmic thrum of the idling car engines. Eleanor turned to Dominic. She felt fragile, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving behind a raw, pulsing vulnerability. She expected him to turn away. She expected the Iron King to reclaim his distance. Instead, Dominic walked toward her. Every step was deliberate. He stopped inches away, his shadow falling over her like a protective shield. He reached out, his large, scarred hand gently cupping her face. "I spent 20 years looking for the people who burned my world down," he said, his voice a low, emotional vibration. "I thought I'd find them with guns in their hands. I never thought I'd find the person who rebuilt it, standing right next to me every morning. Dominic, I'm sorry, she whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. I should have told you. No, he said, shaking his head. You showed me. You showed me who you were every time you protected my sister, every time you saved my life. Your name isn't Vancini. Your name is Eleanor. And you're coming home with me. He pulled her into his chest, a crushing, desperate embrace that felt like a reunion after a lifetime of war. In that moment, the turning point was complete. The past was ash, the future was a blank ledger. But as they stood there, the peace was shattered by a crackle on Brian's radio. Dominic, we have a problem, Brian's voice came through, sharp and urgent. Santanico wasn't alone. She's hijacked the main Toretto server from the Gala's remote terminal. She's not after the money, she's after the identities of every undercover operative we have in the city. If she uploads that list, the streets will run red tonight. Eleanor pulled back, her eyes snapping to the burning Gala in the distance. The war wasn't over. One last shadow remained. She has the terminal? Eleanor asked, her voice regaining its tactical edge. Yes, Brian replied. And she's locked the building down. It's a fortress. Eleanor looked at Dominic. She didn't have to say a word. He saw the fire in her eyes, the fire of a woman who was ready to protect her kingdom one last time. Let's go, Dominic said, gripping her hand. We have a city to save. The luxury charity Gala, once a temple of opulence, was now a funeral pyre of shattered glass and smoke. The Toretto security team provided a perimeter, but the building was a digital and physical death trap. Santanico pandemonium had triggered the high-security lockdown protocols. Steel shutters sealed the exits, and the internal cooling systems had been rerouted to pump nitrogen into the hallways. Anyone entering would suffocate in minutes. The server room is on the penthouse level, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the roar of the wind as they stood in the back of a tactical van. She was no longer in her emerald dress. She had stripped it down, wearing a tactical vest over the silk slip, her hair tied back with a piece of lace. She looked like a fallen angel of war. Santanico is using a brute force decryption. She'll have the operative list in 6 minutes. Dominic Toretto checked his sidearm, his eyes reflecting the orange glow of the fires. How do we get in? The elevators are dead and the stairwells are pressurized. We don't go through the doors, Eleanor said, pointing to the roof. We go through the ventilation shaft above the ballroom. But someone has to bypass the thermal sensors from the outside while I'm in the crawl space. I'll handle the sensors, Dominic said. He looked at her, his hand reaching out to touch her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Eleanor, if this goes sideways. It won't, she interrupted, her eyes fierce. Because you're the Iron King and I'm the woman who keeps your crown polished. Now move. The climb was a blur of adrenaline and iron. While Dominic scaled the exterior of the building using magnetic grips, a feat of pure physical defiance, Eleanor navigated the cramped, sweltering vents. The heat was suffocating, the smell of burning wires filling her lungs. Every inch she moved was a battle against the claustrophobia that had haunted her since her father's warehouse burned down 20 years ago. I'm not that girl in the fire anymore, she whispered to herself. I'm the fire now. She dropped through the ceiling tiles into the server room just as the progress bar on the massive wall monitor hit 92%. Santanico stood at the master console, her face illuminated by the scrolling lines of code. She looked up, a manic, jagged smile breaking across her face as she saw Eleanor. The secretary returns. Tell me, Eleanor, does it hurt? Knowing that even after you saved him, he'll always see your father's face when he kisses you. He doesn't kiss the name Santanico, Eleanor said, stepping forward, her hands empty. He kisses the woman who is about to end your career. Santanico pulled a sleek, white ceramic pistol. You're too late. The upload is encrypted. Even if you kill me, the world sees those names in 5. 4. I didn't come to kill you, Eleanor said, a cold, triumphant light in her eyes. I came to give you a virus. Eleanor didn't dive for the gun. She threw a small, copper-plated coin, a physical hardware kill switch, directly into the server's cooling intake. The room screamed. A high-pitched whine erupted as the hardware began to melt from the inside out. The monitors flickered, the progress bar freezing at 99% before dissolving into a mess of static and system failure warnings. Santanico shrieked, firing a wild shot that grazed Eleanor's shoulder. Eleanor didn't flinch. She lunged, her movements a blur of the self-defense training she'd secretly mastered over 3 years. She disarmed Santanico with a wrist lock that sent the gun skittering across the floor, then followed up with a precise strike to the solar plexus. As Santanico collapsed, gasping for air, the heavy steel doors of the penthouse were kicked off their hinges. Dominic burst in, his knuckles bleeding, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Eleanor. "The list," he barked. "Gone," Eleanor breathed, leaning against a cooling rack for support. "Total hardware corruption. No one is being exposed tonight." Dominic didn't look at the fallen socialite or the millions of dollars of destroyed equipment. He walked straight to Eleanor, his hands shaking as he took her face in his palms. He didn't say a word. He just crushed his lips to hers in a kiss that tasted of smoke, salt, and 3 years of unspoken longing. It was the most surprising twist of the night. The most feared man in the city, surrendering his heart to the woman everyone had mocked. Dominic pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "You're bleeding," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he'd spent a lifetime hiding. "It's just a scratch, Dom," she smiled, her eyes bright with tears. "I've had worse paper cuts organizing your taxes." He let out a short, wet laugh, pulling her back into his arms. Outside, the sun was beginning to peek over the Atlantic, the first light of a new day washing over the city. The Iron King and his ugly secretary stood amidst the ruins of their enemies, finally, truly seeing one another. Dominic pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "You're bleeding," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he'd spent a lifetime hiding. "It's just a scratch, Dom," she smiled, her eyes bright with tears. "I've had worse paper cuts organizing your taxes." He let out a short, wet laugh, pulling her back into his arms. Outside, the sun was beginning to peek over the Atlantic, the first light of a new day washing over the city. The Iron King and his ugly secretary stood amidst the ruins of their enemies, finally, truly seeing one another. 6 months later, the Toretto shipyard was no longer a place of rust and shadows, but a gleaming beacon of the city's new era. The charred remains of the Gala were a distant memory, replaced by a foundation of transparency and legitimate growth. But some things remained sacred. Eleanor Rigby stood on the balcony of the Toretto penthouse, looking out over the skyline she had once navigated from the dark. She wasn't wearing an oversized blazer or hiding behind thick lenses. She wore a tailored suit of midnight blue, her hair styled with a confidence that radiated from within. She had grown, not because she had changed her face but because she had stopped hiding her soul. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, the familiar, comforting scent of sandalwood and expensive leather enveloping her. Dominic Toretto leaned down, his lips brushing the curve of her neck. "The board is waiting," he murmured, his voice a warm rumble. "They're still terrified of you, you know. They call you the ghost of the empire behind your back." Eleanor smiled, leaning back into his solid chest. "Let them be terrified, Dom. Keeps them honest. Besides, someone has to make sure you don't overspend on the new fleet of interceptors." "I don't need a secretary to tell me that anymore," Dominic said, turning her around in his arms so he could look into her eyes. The hardness of the Iron King had been replaced by a quiet, profound peace when he was with her. "I need a partner. My equal." The resolution of their journey wasn't just in the survival of the Toretto name, but in the redemption of the Vancini bloodline. Eleanor had spent the last 6 months using the redirected Vancini fortune to build youth centers and tech academies in the city's most neglected wards. She had turned a legacy of destruction into a future of opportunity. Mia walked onto the balcony holding a folder and looking more vibrant than ever. "The papers are signed, Eleanor. The Vancini Trust is officially the largest donor to the city's education fund. You did it." The sisters-in-law shared a knowing look, a bond forged in the fire of that shipyard. Eleanor had found the family she thought she had lost forever in the flames of her childhood. "I didn't do it alone," Eleanor said, reaching out to take Dominic's hand. As they walked into the boardroom together, the room went silent. The elite who had once mocked the ugly secretary now stood in respect. They didn't see a mouse. They saw the architect of the most powerful alliance the city had ever seen. The ugly glasses were long gone, but Eleanor kept them in her top drawer as a reminder. The world only sees what you allow it to see, but the right person will see everything you try to hide. The story that began with a poisoned glass and a mocked girl ended with a throne shared by two people who had found light in each other's shadows. The Toretto Empire was no longer a mafia kingdom. It was a legacy built on the only thing more powerful than fear: trust.